In the beginning, silence feels like a blessing, but the kind of silence where you start hearing someone else's footsteps, that's a curse. When Jack took the night watchman job at an old dairy farm in Wisconsin, he figured it would be an easy way to save some money. The place was isolated, the pay was above average, and all he had to do was patrol the grounds from midnight to 6 a.m. His only companion was an old German shepherd named Shadow, a dog with a wary stare and a completely silent gait. They told him Shadow had served with the military, been through Afghanistan, and seen things people couldn't imagine. Jack shrugged it off. A dog's a dog. As long as it obeys, that's all that matters. And Shadow obeyed. Sometimes a little too well. The first week went smoothly. Jack sat in the guard booth, sipping coffee from his thermos and listening to podcasts. Every so often, he'd do a round with his flashlight, Shadow following behind like a ghost, never making a sound. But on Friday, around 2 a.m., Shadow suddenly froze. The dog stared toward the old, unused barn. His ears were pinned back, breathing erratic. "What is it?" Jack whispered, though he knew no one had been in that barn for 5 years. Shadow didn't move, didn't growl, just stared into the dark. "Probably a coyote," Jack muttered, sweeping his flashlight over the area. That was the first time he noticed the beam dim as it hit the barn's edge, as if the air there was thicker, soaking up the light. The next night, it happened again. Exactly at 2:13 a.m., Shadow stopped and fixed his gaze on the barn. And this time, Jack heard knocking, faint, like someone lightly tapping on wood. Twice. A pause, then again, twice. Shadow's ears flattened. "Who's there?" Jack called out, not even sure why he said it aloud. Only the wind from the forest replied. He returned to the booth, but couldn't sleep. He could have sworn he heard the dog whimper. Just once, a short, soft sound, like a whisper. Until then, Shadow had never made a noise, not even when Jack tossed him treats. On the fourth night, the radio in the booth began to crackle, even though it was turned off. Jack was listening to a podcast through his headphones, but he started hearing voices, not from the show. He pulled the headphones off, and yes, the radio, unlit and unplugged, was hissing. Beneath the static, human voices murmured, "Come back. Let us go." He yanked the plug from the wall. The radio kept crackling. Shadow pressed against the door like he either wanted to flee or hide. Jack peeked outside, and there it was again. The barn's shadow, thicker than ever. On the fifth night, Shadow began the patrol on his own. Normally he followed Jack, but this time the dog moved ahead, growled, and headed toward the barn. Jack followed, unsure why. As they neared it, Shadow's footsteps suddenly stopped. Then Jack heard a third footstep. Behind him. He spun around, no one there. But in the dirt was a footprint. Not his, not a paw print, a boot, deeper than it should have been, as if made by something heavy. "Shadow?" Jack breathed. But the dog was no longer at his side. He was staring into the barn. Jack's flashlight didn't reach inside. The darkness was complete, thick as ink. And then he heard it, breathing, long, ragged. Not a dog, not a person, something in between. On the sixth night, Jack decided to enter the barn. He brought a lantern, a crowbar, and a helmet camera, just to prove to himself it was all in his head. Shadow stayed outside. Inside, it smelled of moldy straw and something sour, uncomfortably familiar, like decaying flesh, but without the scent of death. He walked over the rotting floorboards until he noticed a hatch in the ground, old, rusted. Jack didn't even remember it being there before. He knelt to open it and felt the air pull downward, like something was breathing beneath him. The hatch moved on its own. From the dark, a hand emerged, thin, gray-skinned, fingers too long. Jack screamed and ran. Shadow was waiting at the exit, but when Jack burst out of the barn, the dog growled. At him. At him. "It's me!" Jack shouted. "Calm down!" Shadow didn't obey. His fur bristled, growling deep in his throat. Then he turned and bolted, away from the farm. Jack never saw him again. On the 7th night, Jack dug through the farm's old archives, floor plans, guard logs, newspaper clippings. In one folder, he found a faded journal, notes from a guard named Kevin, dated 1986. The dog's acting weird, always staring at the barn. There's something in there. Today, Shadow didn't come back. I heard someone mimicking my voice, calling to me from the dark. The final entry. I don't think Shadow was a dog. Sometimes at night I see him standing on 2 legs, watching me. On the 8th night, Jack stayed on the farm. No flashlight, no dog, just a new transmission from the radio. "Jack, Jack, let us in." At first he ran, but where to? The forest was closing in. The shadows stretched longer. Footsteps followed, and in the end he realized Shadow hadn't run. He'd just gone home, to the ones waiting below, beneath the roots of the old farm. And now Jack is a watchman too. Only this time he guards something else. Mark knew every corner of the vast department store. He felt like its guardian, a solitary sentinel in a realm of empty counters and silent mannequins. The nights dragged on, filled with the hum of ventilation and the echo of his own footsteps. He was used to the silence, the solitude. But lately, something had changed. The silence pressed down on him, like a thick, viscous mass filled with invisible whispers. His shift began with a routine patrol, checking cameras, locking doors, patrolling the floors. At night, the department store turned into a labyrinth, where every corridor seemed endless, and every boutique a dark cave. Mark felt lost, as if wandering through someone else's dream. One day, passing by the mirror department, he noticed a strange reflection. It didn't match his movements, as if it had a life of its own. Mark blinked, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the light, but unease had already settled in his heart. With each night, the oddities multiplied. The sounds became clearer, whispers, laughter, footsteps echoing from empty corridors. Mark began to notice his reflection behaving strangely, pausing for a second, smiling when he frowned. He tried to tell his colleagues, but they brushed him off, saying he was overworked. Mark knew that wasn't it. He felt his mind playing tricks on him, reality distorting. One night, he heard someone call his name. The voice was soft, but clear, as if coming from inside his head. Mark turned and saw a shadow resembling a human figure slither across the corridor. He ran after it, but the shadow vanished as if dissolving into thin air. Mark felt his heart pounding in his chest, fear gripping him. Mark began to lose his sense of time and space. The department store turned into a labyrinth, where every turn led to the unknown. He no longer knew where reality was and where hallucinations were. He began to see strange things on the security cameras, figures that appeared and disappeared, objects that changed their position. He tried to find logical explanations, but couldn't. One day, reviewing the footage, he saw himself on the screen, standing in a corridor, back to the camera, staring into the void. But when he turned, there was no one there. He felt his mind crumbling. Mark could no longer distinguish himself from his reflection. He felt his personality dissolving, becoming part of this distorted space. He began to talk to himself, argue with his reflection, trying to understand who he was. He wandered the department store like a ghost, lost in the labyrinth of his own mind. He saw himself on the cameras, but didn't recognize himself. He heard his voice, but didn't understand what he was saying. One night, he approached a mirror and saw his reflection smiling. But it wasn't his smile. It was the smile of something alien, something that had taken over his body. Mark, after several sleepless nights, realized that the strange phenomena in the department store were neither mystical nor hallucinations. He discovered that at night, due to malfunctions in the electrical network, there was distortion of the cameras and reflections in the mirrors. Plus, rodents had nested in the ventilation system, making strange sounds. He shared his findings with the department store administration, and they took action. Electricians fixed the wiring, pest control conducted treatment, and the cameras returned to normal operation. Mark, with the help of colleagues and a psychologist, gradually regained his confidence and sense of reality. He understood that his fears were caused not by supernatural forces, but by quite explainable factors. He returned to his work, but now looked at the department store with different eyes. He was no longer afraid of shadows and reflections because he knew they posed no threat. Mark, having overcome his fears, felt stronger and more confident. He understood that even in the darkest times, you can find light if you don't lose hope and seek answers. He began a new life, full of hope and optimism, knowing that he was capable of overcoming any difficulties.